Does God ever change his plans? We'll talk about that in a minute. Hey, I'm Mike. This is Temple on Wheels. We are coming to you today from Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It was an oil boom town. It was formed because of oil being discovered in this area. We're about 30 miles away from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and it was also a boom town. It even had a Rolls-Royce dealership in it at one time, but the oil boomed and then it busted in Pawhuska, and it fell on hard times until a lady who started a TV show called Pioneer Woman, Lee Drummond, bought a building down there based on her television show and renovated it, and now that whole area is coming back, and it's quite a destination. But so is Bartlesville. What you're looking at is a square, and in a minute you're going to see behind me a Frank Lloyd Wright designed building. It's a taller skyscraper type building, which is now an art center, and you see the beautiful flowers and bees. Statue here over to the right of me is a venue for activities, and you'll also see a 66 because Phillips 66, founded by Frank Phillips, was born here, and still offices here. Their corporate headquarters are still here. So getting back to my question, does God ever change his plans? A while back I was listening to a podcast, and the podcaster said this: God changes his plans. The only time he ever changes his plans is when when he hedges towards mercy. So the examples of that is, and when I first said that to my wife, she was reading Numbers, and she said, well, I just read about a guy that went out into the wilderness and gathered firewood on a Sabbath day, and he was stoned. So where's the mercy in that? And those of you that have sat in a Bible study or a small group and know my wife knows that she can just pose a question like that will stop you dead in your tracks. And she did, so I had to rethink all of that. So here's some examples of God's mercy. God told Israel not to follow false gods, and they did over and over and over again, and he finally had it with them. His anger was kindled, and he told Moses that he was just going to destroy them all, and that he was going to start over with Moses. And Moses said, God, don't do that, because your enemies will be looking at this and saying, snickering at you, saying, he just bought this people out of Egypt so he could bring them into the desert and leave them to die. And that won't bode well. So God relented and offered mercy, offered a way for Israel to turn back to him, to call upon him and receive his mercy. Another example is David. David, later in his kingship, decided to count his army, and that was unauthorized by God. It was an unauthorized census, and God was mad, and he told David, I'll give you three choices. You can either have 3 years of war, 3 months of famine, or 3 days of pestilence. And David said 3 days of pestilence. And the angel of the Lord was going around, and before you could bat an eye, 70,000 Israelites had been killed, and David met the angel of the Lord at the threshing floor on the temple, where the Temple Mount was being introduced and built, and said, God, enough. I'm the one that caused this. Take me. And the last quickly was Ahab, one of the most wicked kings ever, he and his wife Jezebel, and God called him out, and he said, your blood's going to flow out of your chariot, and the dogs are going to lick it up, and your wife is going to die in the city streets, and there will be nothing left of her. The animals will eat her up. And when Ahab heard that, he repented. He put on sackcloth and mourned in sadness over all of that, and God stopped what he was doing and said, I'm not going to I'm not going to do that now for a while. We'll put that on hold. But the biggest act of mercy, was Jesus on the cross. God offered his own son to pay the price of our sin, and he died and covered our sin debt, and 3 days later rose from the dead, and that overcame death so that we would be with God everlasting. Hey, I'm Mike. This is Temple on Wheels. Thanks for joining us today.